Hey everyone, welcome to this deep dive. And we're going to be tackling a big question today.
Yeah, a big one.
Could Bitcoin hit $250,000 by the end of 2025?
It's a really interesting question.
Yeah, so we're actually basing this exploration on an episode of Altcoin Daily on YouTube.
Oh, yeah, I saw that one.
Yeah, and they brought in some big names in the crypto and macro world like Raoul Pal and Arthur Hayes
Those guys know their stuff.
to try and answer that very question.
And what's so fascinating is that to even approach that question, they start talking about something you might not expect.
What's that?
Global money supply, or what's called M2.
Right, M2, for anyone who's not familiar, that's basically like all the money sloshing around in the economy.
Yeah, then cash savings accounts, money market funds, all that stuff.
The liquid stuff.
Yeah, and this YouTube episode, they pointed out this crazy correlation.
82%, right?
82% between Bitcoin's price and the global M2 supply.
That's huge.
Yeah, and it gets even wilder because Bitcoin's price historically lags behind M2 by about 8 to 12 weeks.
Oh, wow. So it's like a delayed reaction.
Yeah, kind of. And so in the video, they showed this chart, right, with Bitcoin's price as a white line and M2 as a pink line. And since like 2014, those two lines, they've moved almost perfectly together.
Wow. So does that mean, like, can we just look at where M2 is going and then know what Bitcoin's price is going to be?
Well, it's not that simple, unfortunately. The video, they highlighted a couple reasons why this correlation isn't perfect.
Right, because there's always other things going on.
Always, for example, remember when FTX collapsed back in late 2022?
Oh, yeah.
Bitcoin's price tanked no matter what M2 was doing.
Right.
And then on the other hand, when Bitcoin ETFs launched in early 2024,
Huge surge
in price. And that didn't seem connected to M2 at all.
So it sounds like whenever something big happens, specifically in the crypto world, it can really mess with that correlation.
Totally. And the other thing that makes this correlation tricky is those global events.
Oh, yeah. You mean like
Stuff that impacts M2 and Bitcoin simultaneously.
Right.
So think like trade wars. Huge government policy changes anything that really shakes up the global economy.
So in those situations, it's like trying to figure out what's impacting Bitcoin more, M2 or everything else.
Right, exactly. It becomes this big tangled web.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So with all that said, if we're trying to figure out what this means for Bitcoin in 2025, we got to look at what's happening with M2 right now.
Okay, so what's going on with M2?
So the thing is, global M2 just hit an all-time high.
An all-time high. So does that mean like...
Well, if that historical correlation we were talking about holds true, it could mean Bitcoin climbs back up to $100,000 by May 2025.
Wow.
Some analysts are even predicting it to hit like $160,000 by then.
That's wild.
It is. But, it's important to remember this is all based on that M2 correlation. Things could totally play out differently.
Sure, of course. But it's exciting to think about.
Oh, definitely.
So this YouTube episode we're talking about, they also brought in Raoul Pal and Arthur Hayes.
Yeah.
And both of them seem pretty bullish on Bitcoin's future.
Oh, yeah. They're both leaning into the optimism, for sure.
So Raoul Pal in particular, he seems to be taking like a really global view.
Yeah. He's really looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah, and he was saying that China's increasing money supply, that's a big factor driving this.
Right. And we actually saw a similar trend from China back before the 2021 Bitcoin bull run.
Oh, interesting.
So he's seeing some parallels there.
Okay, that's super interesting. What about Arthur Hayes? I know he's always got some bold predictions.
Oh, yeah. Never afraid to make a splash.
So what's he thinking?
Well, his prediction is pretty bold. He believes Bitcoin will hit $250,000 by the end of 2025.
Whoa, okay.
And what's interesting is he thinks we'll get there, even with all the volatility we're seeing right now in the market.
So he's not letting these short-term ups and downs shake his confidence?
Not at all. He's looking at the long game.
What's his reasoning for such a huge prediction, though?
Well, his logic is a bit more complex.
Yeah.
He believes this current lull in the market, this is temporary and actually a result of deliberate policies by the Trump administration.
Wait, Trump, he's back in the White House.
He is, yeah. So what Hayes is saying is that Trump is intentionally using trade wars to slow down economic growth.
So he's like creating a bit of chaos, but for what purpose?
Well, according to Hayes, this strategy, it's all about forcing the Federal Reserve.
You mean the Fed?
The ones who control interest rates in the U.S. to lower those rates.
So it's like a way to pressure the Fed into doing what Trump wants.
Exactly. Create some economic pain in the short term.
So the Fed will lower rates to try and ease that pain.
Right.
But how does all of that tie into Bitcoin?
Okay, so Hayes believes the whole point of this strategy is to allow the U.S. government to refinance its huge debt at lower interest rates.
Okay, that makes sense.
And once the Fed gives in and lowers rates, Hayes thinks we're going to see a period of just massive money printing.
Which he believes will benefit Bitcoin.
Exactly. He's saying that what looks like economic turmoil right now is actually this calculated setup for a massive wave of inflation.
Which will ultimately push Bitcoin's price up.
That's the argument.
Yeah.
And Hayes believes this isn't just limited to the U.S. He's pointing to things like increased military spending in Europe, the need to service existing debt globally, as all contributing to this inflationary environment.
So we're talking about this potential perfect storm brewing, where governments worldwide are basically forced to print money like crazy.
To manage their debt and all this spending, yeah, that's the scenario Hayes is laying out.
And he sees Bitcoin as the winner in that kind of environment.
Exactly, because unlike the U.S. dollar or the euro, you can't just print more Bitcoin.
Right.
There's a fixed supply, and that scarcity that becomes really appealing when everything else is being devalued by inflation.
Makes sense. People would want to hold something that isn't constantly being diluted.
Exactly.
But this whole theory hinges on the idea that we're headed for massive global inflation.
Right.
Are there signs out there that suggest Hayes might be right about that?
Well, if we look beyond just the M2 money supply,
Okay.
there are definitely some other indicators that point to increasing inflationary pressures. Well, for example, commodity prices have been climbing steadily.
Oh, yeah, I've noticed that.
Yeah, we're seeing the costs of things like oil metals, even food going up.
And those rising commodity prices, eventually, they trickle down to us, the consumers, right?
Exactly. It means we end up paying more for everyday things at the grocery store, at the gas pump, everywhere.
Right.
And then you have to factor in all the supply chain disruptions that are still lingering from the pandemic.
Oh, yeah, true.
When you combine limited supply with strong demand.
It's a recipe for higher prices.
Exactly.
So it sounds like there's real evidence out there that inflation could become a serious problem.
In the coming years, yeah, for sure.
And in that kind of world, Hayes believes Bitcoin is the asset to own.
That's his view, and it's an interesting one.
Yeah.
But, we also have to acknowledge that predicting what's going to happen in the economy,
It's really hard.
it's so tricky. There are so many moving parts, and unexpected events can always throw things off course.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's not like we could just take Hayes' prediction as gospel. But even if things don't unfold exactly as he's picturing them, the idea that Bitcoin could serve as a hedge against inflation.
That's something that a lot of investors are starting to take seriously.
Yeah, it makes you think.
For sure.
So let's bring this all back to our listener for a moment.
Okay.
What does this mean for someone who's maybe just starting to learn about Bitcoin or crypto in general?
I think the key takeaway here is that understanding how things like global money supply and inflation can influence Bitcoin's price.
Yeah.
That's really valuable knowledge. It can help you make more informed decisions about whether Bitcoin is something you want to invest in or not.
So it's not enough to just look at price charts and try to guess which way the market is going to move.
Right. You need to understand what's happening in the bigger economic picture, too.
Because those larger economic forces can have a huge impact on crypto.
Oh, absolutely. They can drive Bitcoin's price up or down, but they can also influence the general sentiment around crypto as a whole.
This has been a fascinating deep dive. We've gone from this intriguing correlation between Bitcoin and global M2 to exploring the potential for rising inflation.
And how Bitcoin's fixed supply might make it a safe haven in that kind of environment.
And we've looked at some expert opinions from Raoul Pal and Arthur Hayes, who are both pretty optimistic about Bitcoin's future.
Though their reasoning differs in some pretty interesting ways.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how Bitcoin, which started as this fringe digital currency,
Right.
is now being analyzed through the lens of macroeconomics.
It really shows how the world of finance is constantly evolving, and understanding these larger trends can give you a real advantage.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with one big question for our listener. If global money supply keeps expanding, like these experts are predicting, will you be ready for a potential Bitcoin boom? I mean, we've seen how Bitcoin's price has kind of followed the growth of M2, and now global M2 is at an all-time high, and that definitely makes you think.
Yeah, it really does. It's a question each of us has to answer for ourselves, based on our own financial situation, our risk tolerance, and how much we really understand this whole landscape.
Right, and we're not giving financial advice here, of course.
Definitely not.
But hopefully what we've done today is giving you some new knowledge, some insights that can help you navigate the world of Bitcoin and how it's all connected to the global economy.
Yeah, we've explored the data, looked at what the experts are saying, even considered some potential future scenarios. Now it's up to you to do your own research and decide how this information fits into your own financial journey.
I think what's really striking is that this whole deep dive has highlighted just how interconnected everything is Bitcoin, which was once this niche thing that only tech enthusiasts were talking about is now being analyzed alongside global macroeconomic trends. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. It's a reminder that the world of finance is constantly changing, evolving, and having an understanding of those larger trends can be a powerful tool.
Absolutely. So to our listener, we'll leave you with this. Don't just sit back and watch these trends unfold. Engage with them, dive deeper, learn more, ask questions, because the future of finance is being shaped right now, and we all have a role to play in it.